Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Assembly Budget Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to start with, before we do introductions, I need to make an amendment to the agenda. The school board is going to give a budget presentation to the Budget and Finance Committee, and it should have been on the agenda, but it was omitted, so I'm going to add it. Please add it to your agenda for number 3, school budget presentation. Thank you. Now let's do introductions. We'll start with you.
My name is Joe Rigson with the Budget Advisory Commission.
Shirley Nelson, Budget Advisory Commission Chair.
Al Tamani, Budget Advisory Committee. Andy Ratliff, Anchorage School District Finance.
Mark Foster, Anchorage School District CFO.
L.B. Gray Jackson.
Amy Domboski.
Bill Evans.
Jim Steele.
Pete Peterson.
Dick Drainey. Mike Chadwick, Control Audit.
Thank you. Okay, school district, you're on.
All right, so I guess we'll just walk through the school district's memo to the assembly for our budget. I'm not sure how much time we have.
Not a lot. 15
So we'll-
minutes max. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank
We'll
you.
walk through it quickly. I don't know if everyone has a copy or not. I didn't bring extras, but the basic is we're asking for $784.2 million in upper limit spending authority from the municipality. That's $603.2 million of general fund, $57.4 million of state, local, and federal grant funding, $87.1 million or $87.2 in debt service, $7 million in capital projects, which will be just the possibility of state capital legislative grants. It wouldn't include our expected bond spend that we've already approved through the voters. And then $22.3 million in food service and about $7.2 million in student activities funds. And then we have another 48, that comes up to $784.2 million in our managed budget that we're going to ask for approval on. And then we have another approximately 48.1 of State of Alaska on behalf payments for PERS and TERS. So then of that, we're going to request local property taxes in the amount of $241,627,624 between the general and debt service funds. The breakdown on that is, let's see, do we have it? I'll find the breakdown on between the debt service and the general fund. Okay. What's the calendar?
Yeah, but you can describe this. I think that'll help.
So it's about $201.5 million in general fund, tax appropriation around $39 million in debt service.
The other thing I want people to note is the mill rate. We expect to decline from a little over 7 to down in the 6.9 range as we look at the request. A couple other key features in this budget compared to prior years. The board made a decision to use about $17 million in reserves to avoid making substantial cuts to the classroom. After basically 3 years of making reductions, including last year making significant reductions in the classroom in the initial budget, which resulted in over 400 dislocations of teachers that were later restored. That dislocation led the board and the superintendent to give serious thought to how can we manage the decline and take a pause in a particularly busy year with a lot of mandates. Mandates coming in the form of new testing requirements, mandates coming in the form of new requirements in the food service area, and mandates coming in the form of new evaluation requirements for teachers. So how do we basically give people a break from this constant decline, take the break, strategically deploy your reserves, and so you really do get a period where you can focus on many of those tasks at hand, and then face the challenges that you have in terms of balancing in subsequent years. So you're really creating a managed step down rather than just a continuous pressure. I think that's a strategic choice that was made, and now we get to see how well we can survive with that choice depending on the outcome of the legislative session and evaluate how deep the legislative session cuts might be, what will then be required as we look at staffing, delaying stuff that we might have. We've got software licenses that are up for renewal. Can we, maybe discontinue some of that? And then ultimately, what reserves might we also have available as we balance that out? And so we don't look forward to that challenge in April at closing that, but we're certainly busy building a lot of contingency plans in view of that, and also in view of the normal stuff that we look at in our contingency planning in the spring, which includes enrollment. It's not unusual for enrollment to be plus or minus 500 students in any given year, which is a significant amount, because that really is, for us, easily on the order of 30 or 40 teachers, depending on where it comes and how it comes and what special needs might be associated with it. So right now we're spending a lot of time in contingency planning and trying to anticipate what might we do. But until we get a final disposition from the legislature, that's what we're doing, is contingency planning.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any questions, Mr. Bosky?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Mr. Foster, since our last meeting, I had asked the school board if they, no one was aware apparently that the House had passed out their budget. Have you evaluated that yet, and what is the impact to ASD if the House budget stands?
The House budget impact on ASD is roughly $12 million in reduction in the so-called one-time money in HB 278, and the additional grant reductions that occur across the DEEP grant programs that flow through to ASD are on the order of $450,000. So relatively modest on the grant side. The significant reduction is in the one-time money.
And that's all in with the overall reduction from last year's level is about 12.5 million then?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Foster, can you give me a scenario, paperwork on when you want your budget changed to? Because this is a problem every year with your budget coming into us. And what I would like is a document that we can get through our assembly process to change when your budget is due to us.
Yes, and
Because I want to come after the state to determine what your budget really is.
yeah, the board is looking at that and specifically looking at alternative calendars. The basic challenge is this. If the state finishes in April, then we have whether or not we have certainty from the governor and sort of a time frame, which frequently goes more than 30 days. We're required to issue notices to teachers about whether we're going to non-retain those who are tenured by the middle of May. So we have a really tight window between when we get a legislative disposition and maybe an affirmative decision from the governor or signal about where to go and that layoff period. So we're struggling with, do we try and fit something in there, or do we do what they're doing in Fairbanks, which is telling a lot of folks, here's your non-retention, because we don't know where it's going to land. And so we're just sort of struggling with how best to approach that.
If you determine it and then bring it to this committee, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I
Because every year we go through this little juggling circle. When you don't really know what you're going to get out of the state, then we got to play this game. You have to submit it to us again. It would be nice to have it done and finished one time a year.
Exactly, and several board members are very interested in it and are currently working that.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Thank you, Ms. Grayson.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele?
Can you refresh my memory what your projection for student population is going? What is it going to do between the 2 years?
Yeah, we using a demographic model where we're really looking at births in the Anchorage Bowl and then how many of those births result in kindergarten and first graders. So that's our baseline. What we see is a higher proportion of births compared to sort of the prior 5 years in this 5 years that are coming out on a horizon. So the trend of family sizes getting smaller and enrollment declining as a demographic factor is stalling out. And we're really seeing that starting to moderate and come back, so household sizes look like they're growing a bit. As a result, we see more kids coming into our elementary schools over the next 5 years, while we have a slight decline in middle and high school. So over the next 5 years overall, we might see a -1%, but that's really sort of a -2 on the upper grades and a +1 on the front end. And that in turn drives more teachers in order for us to sustain small class sizes in elementary school. And that's one of the key drivers. And so you'll see in the budget that you have in front of you, we're a +1.8% on teachers, largely as a result of that demographic shift.
Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen to the military either, but that's a whole huge unknown that's going to have to be dealt with.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Any other questions? Thank you very much for this presentation, and please feel free to leave.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Ms. Geyer and Ms. Banja, please join us at the table. You're next.
So, as we did last meeting, we brought in the division managers for finance to give you an update on the various aspects of finance. So first to go, Madam Chair, would be Tom Fink, who's a controller and in charge of the audit.
Thank you.
He's just going to give you a no more than 3 minutes.
Thank you.
on the audit.
Good afternoon. So very briefly, we're working on the audit. Things are going well. We had a couple of hiccups, but we're getting caught up. The audit is such that, if we're waiting for a number, there's a domino effect. So we're going to get behind, but once we get the number, everything kind of falls into place quickly. I meet with Michelle Drew, the partner, every week. She's happy with what they have so far. There's plenty of work. I meet with my team weekly to, kind of iron out any problems we have. And so as of now, we're on schedule. You'll continue to get the weekly updates, and if there's any questions, feel free to ask, and then we'll get back to you. But things are going well so far, and I don't anticipate any delays.
Okay, thank you. This committee is not getting any other updates. Maybe the audit committee is, but we aren't. But since you mentioned it, I would love for this committee to also have the updates.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
And finally, Mr. Fink, when do you think we'll have fund balance numbers?
Well, the email you sent, I'm looking at the April 10th to present. I spoke with Pam, and we're still trying to get caught up based on the interest allocation delay. We're working to get as fast as we can. I talked to Marilyn yesterday, and I'm going to coordinate with her the presentation. So I'll keep you in the loop if there's anything else.
Ms. Goddard, at the last meeting a month ago, you gave us a rough estimate of what the surplus, is what I'm going to call it, would be for 2014. Can you do that again today?
I have to do it off my memory, but I can. There's one item that came in, and I want Mr. Roberts to talk to you about it, and that is the decision of the court about that appeal on the tax.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Property appraisal is primarily focused on appeals, assessment appeals right now. We got 415 appeals representing about $367 million in value. Over the last few years, the reduction has been between 6 and 10%. We're at March 15th was also the deadline for filing for exemptions. We're in the process of accumulating that information. We're also working on the March projection, which is what is used to set the mill rate. We intend to have that projection to OMB by the close of business tomorrow. Kate was referring to an exemption appeal by the sports dome. We got a Superior Court ruling yesterday that ruled against the municipality. The municipality had found that was not exempt during its first 4 years of existence, and that represents $600,000 in taxes. We're working with legal to determine whether to appeal this to the Supreme Court, and right now I believe we probably will. I think that covers property appraisal.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
What was the basis for their appeal?
That they were a charitable nonprofit organization and therefore qualified for the exemption from the outset. And this appeal, I believe, is 2008 through 2011 tax years.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Please continue.
Mr. Moore will tell you the status of revenue. He has finished his 2014 revenue projection.
Yes, so yesterday we briefed the internal administration on where we stand with revenues. This is for calendar year 2014. Overall, we're right around a $3.1 million positive variance in revenues. That's for all the 100 funds, which are the main funds that you kind of know about: parks, roads, police, fire, and area-wide. So $3.1 million positive variance. That as a percentage, it's 0.5% positive when you compare the numbers, the budgeted number to the actual year end. These are unaudited, so the numbers, are going to be more precise, obviously, through the CAFR, but percentage-wise, dollar-wise, they should be real close to that. The main drivers, almost everything is positive this year, which is good. The permit activity in the construction area really created a nice positive. Property tax was a very modest positive, just a little over $1 million out of the 400-some million that we taxed. Ambulance service fees is up almost $1 million. That was significant. That was due to that rate increase. And then tourism was really good. 9% in room tax. That's very strong. And rental vehicle tax was up 10%. We would not expect that to repeat itself, but that was a really strong year. And they're actually building, I think, 3 more hotels as we speak. So it's, there's some real strength there. Other than that, the only real negative that sort of stands out is investment earnings, and that's not, we invest the same way. Our structure is still good, but and this is in the cash flow area. But the market was just really, really tough last year. It was very low rates and quite volatile at times. So overall, it was a $1.6 million hit on the budget. So hopefully this year will be a little bit better. It should normally come in positive, but last year was a rough year. So that's the summary of revenues. The report that we give you will come to you at the April 14th meeting. So that's when you'll get all the details.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
This is Mr. Jackson. Our tobacco income, how are we doing on the taxes on that? It was holding pretty steady. But
Yeah, and actually I failed to mention that, but that was another surprise, is that for the month of December, tobacco's every month, it's all over. Okay, so at the month of December, we had taken the average monthly amount of tobacco tax for the previous 11 months, and December was down 30%. So, but it's a timing issue in terms of when they purchased their product. January of this year was way up, so it was a timing issue. But because of that, there was a $1 million hit just in the month of December, and that's built into that $3.1 million. Tobacco overall is very steady. It's about 22 million, but we have different factors in play. We have consumption going down about 3% per year, which is a good thing, for public health. We also have inflationary increase each year, but inflation's been very, very low, so that's okay. And then you have things like e-cigarettes, which are kind of a growing part of the market. They're still very, very small overall, but that can, sort of go against the tobacco revenue. But overall, when you factor all those factors together, it's pretty steady, 22 million. We also just had the federal case decided by Judge Sharon Gleason on the tobacco fraud case, and we were ordered restitution. We're not sure the exact amount. It's going to be $1.3 to $2 million of restitution plus a very small amount of interest, and it's going to take us a long time to try to recover that. But it was a very favorable. They gave jail time to the people that tried to defraud us. So that was really, really strong result. Sent a very strong message, and that was just
out to the rest of the public too.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we were real pleased with that decision, and that will also help the tobacco revenues to be strong, so people don't try to game the system. So
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele?
Madam Chair, I have just a couple of small questions to the auditor in terms of about a particular exemption, if we're ready to get into that kind of discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, the auditor is not here, but I think you may be referring to the
Appraiser, I'm
controller,
sorry.
Mr. Fink.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm interested in the sprinkler exemption. we have it in here, there are a number of facilities that are required to install sprinklers. Do they get the exemption?
Yes.
And
If they apply.
Okay.
They have to apply for the exemption.
And then the other question is that only for a period of time based upon the value of the sprinkler system itself? When it's paid off, they lose that exemption, or how does that work?
No, it's been interpreted as a permanent exemption attached to that property.
So some of these folks may be making money.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that, Mr. Steele, because we're looking into that. I have a memo with a whole lot of information, which I'll be happy to share with the committee and anybody else who's interested. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Ms. Van Zosten, talk to you about first quarter
Thank
budget
you.
revision. May I mention a couple things about 2014 budget to actuals? We do have a couple items on the agenda for the March 24th meeting. The municipal manager submitting a resolution for 2014 in regards to hotel motel tax being higher than our budget. And so we'll have some contractual obligations that we're requesting appropriation for related to that. That will be on the regular agenda. And then we have two items that are on the addendum. One is for the E911 surcharge revenue fund, which was newly created in 2014. We appropriated the 2014 budget based on our revenue projection, and the revenues actually came in higher than that projection by $36,000, and so we'll have a resolution requesting appropriation for that. Additionally, for 2014 operating area-wide, we'll have another resolution on the addendum for the Health and Human Services overage and Fire Department overage. So those items will be on the 24th agenda.
If I can stop you for a moment. So, and health is 8,000 overage, and fire is 400,000, correct? Thank you. Ms. Domboski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last meeting, we had discussed this $400,000 overage, and I had asked if this was related to the paramedics, and I was told no. Can you give us a little more description as to, you were looking into it as the last meeting, what did this $400,000 come from?
From our analysis, the result is due to, or the overage is due to benefits related to overtime.
So they went $400,000 over their overtime budget.
Benefits related to overtime, yes.
And if I can jump in one moment, Ms. Domboski, Ms. Geyer sent us a spreadsheet that shows all the details.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that shows all the details for the $400,000 overage.
you.
You're welcome.
I'll-
And thank you for sending that.
It's great, actually.
Mr. Trainee?
Wasn't that related to when they changed the payroll system? They were given an extra week of leave, and this is now billed for that week.
I'll take this one on now.
I know you told me.
Through the chair, Mr. Trainee, we initially thought that, and I think that the fire department also thought that, because they are given an amount of money for leave, a budgeted amount. I think they've not achieved that amount in the past. So they've kind of used that amount as anybody would as kind of cushion. So it kind of combines up together, and whether it's overtime or whatever, it all works out. This year, because we had the additional leave, that budget amount actually got all used up. So then they didn't have that cushion, and the amount that was used as cushion in the past kind of ballooned out in overtime and in the benefits on overtime. So it's understandable what the fire department would say, and I think it's a justified rationale that that extra cost wasn't planned or wasn't sufficiently funded when we did give them extra money, and that's why they went out. But really, if you look at their line item in their budget, it says 2.9 million or something like that for holiday or vacation or leave payout, and then it's 2.9 million for the actual leave payout. So you can understand why in the past, if that number's been 2.9 and they've only spent 2.3 and they've used that money other places, that they would say, look, it's all as a result of this. So I don't think there's any one true story. I do believe that the leave cash out had an impact on their overall budget.
Not the whole thing.
Pardon me?
But not the entire cost of the 400,000.
No, I don't think that would be fair either. So I think you can look at it a lot of ways. At the end of the day, we may want to help them look at understanding that when they have overtime, there's also going to be benefits. And in the future, you probably will still have a little bit of cushion in that leave payout that they'll use for other purposes.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's not.
Thank you,
pretty,
Mr.
is
Training.
what I'm
Thank you, Ms.
saying, but
Goddard.
It's not bad either.
Okay,
Sure.
please continue.
Is that okay? Thank you. First quarter budget.
So now, first quarter budget revision is still in the process. We're still identifying funding sources, uses.
Marilyn, can you speak up a little bit?
Excuse me,
Sorry,
yes.
I just am deaf.
I will speak louder. So 2015 first quarter budget revisions, we're still in the process of identifying funding sources and uses. We will be, though, introducing the documents for the appropriations on the April 14th agenda, along with the ordinances for the mill rates for both the city and the ASD. Additionally, we, on the April 14th agenda, will be submitting an AIM that will show a correction to the AM support that we submitted on the 2015 approved budget, and it's just a reallocation of $11,000 in the funding source columns that just show the funding sources for the budget. So those are the items that we're going to submit on the April 14th agenda. Right now, we don't have any firm numbers for the revised budget at this time. And then 2016 budget is going to start soon. Right now, the mayor's office is putting on his website the community council surveys, so the community councils can start rating their capital projects for 2016.
Are you done?
Finally, Madam Chair,
Okay.
we were looking at a between $4 and $6.5 million lapse, and we're still there. Today they talked to you about fund balance. We don't have that number quite hammered down yet. We expect to go through the assessments, so you'll be able to know the mill rate very soon. And Treasury has given us a $3.1 million variance, which is included in the 6.5 number. So you're moved up a little bit in the potential.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, let's move on the agenda. And Ms. Nelson, I'd like to apologize because I usually have a line item for the VAC report, and I didn't this time, and I apologize for that. But I'm going to seize the opportunity to let you talk in item number 4, because it's the resolution that the Assembly is contemplating bringing forward regarding property tax exemptions for nonprofits. So I think it would be a good idea, since this all came about based on a report that the Budget Advisory Commission made, if you could talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
We do really appreciate the effort and proposal to put this resolution through. We have been, I guess we really want to point out, it was a tool that we offered so that you might have the information in front of you as to different avenues to spread out the collection of taxes, basically, you're saying, and we were not targeting any one particular group. And so different meetings that you go to, you hear, we don't want to target the senior exemptions and so on. But this basically was all for the fact of putting tools into the hands of decision makers and stuff. And so we really appreciate that you're taking it to this next step and so on. I know that Al has worked diligently, very tightly with this, and Joe has mentioned too, he goes in and out of Juneau if he would like, if it goes to the next step, that we'd be willing to talk about it more as well with this. So Al, did you want to add just briefly?
I think the report speaks for itself.
Right, it does, and I appreciate that, but there are quite a few people here who probably haven't seen the report, and I really would appreciate it, if you don't mind, if you could talk a little bit about this resolution, because the Budget Advisory Commission brought forward a resolution, and we basically, this draft is pretty much the same as yours, but if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about it, just briefly, I really
I'd be more
appreciate it.
happy to answer
Thank you.
any questions,
Okay.
that anyone would have, but to give a summary, is that in March of last year, we decided well, some questions were brought to us, is to take a look and an overview of all the property exemptions here in Anchorage. And as we dug into it, we seen there were a lot of subsidies being provided by taxpayers to a number of types of the nonprofits. And there was really no clear definition of what a nonprofit is. There is no requirement of an IRS letter of approval for nonprofits by category. There was some confusion and rightfully so misunderstanding that an entity could become a nonprofit state corporation and be exempt from property taxes, but yet they would have to still pay federal income taxes. And so as we got into it, we decided that we would do a complete overview of the status, so we prepared the report. We took a look at the state statutes. We took a look at the Alaska Constitution. We took a look at the municipal ordinance. We took a look at the IRS categories under 501c. There's 27 different categories. And so at that point, we assembled all of the information. The list of the properties is also in there. They're in alpha sequence. There's quite a number of those have a 2% property tax credit on the buildings for having a sprinkler system, which has been required even by code for quite a number of years. And so that's probably something that could be taken care of without changes in this statute. Could be done here locally. That's about $540,000 or so, and that could be graded out over a period of maybe 2 or 3 years. And so that's what we've done. We prepared the report, and that's our responsibilities under the ordinance, for the committee. So that stuff is going to require, some changes in the statute, changes in the ordinance, and those type of things.
Madam Chair, I think too we would like to, one of the main objectives here is to possibly spread out the taxpayers, the property taxpayers have a big responsibility. And in lieu of what's going on with the state and with the step reimbursement now changing too with the school district, for example. So our goal and one of our main objectives is maybe we could possibly spread this out. And we put a study in there, pilot out of Massachusetts, and they did that with some colleges where in payment in lieu of taxes, they voluntarily did it over time, like a 5-year span of paying for some of the services, snow removal, police, fire, and so on. And it's been a very successful program, and I think it's well worth us looking into that. Maybe we can spread this out a little bit because there is a huge, huge burden on the property taxpayers for this. So I think it's a very good tool to be looking at options that are out there for us.
Right. Do you have any other comments you want to make?
Well, I'd like to say that this report wasn't meant to target any one particular group, but to try to give us the tools to be able to start having the discussion with the groups that are out there. For instance, the tax exempt status on the sprinkler systems and perpetual exemption is out there. But being personally, was on the board of a couple nonprofits, and I'm very close to several others. And we all realize that, yes, we do utilize public services, fire and police, and so on. And it's a common sense conversation to have, at least from my experience on the nonprofit side. This is a good way to get the tools out there to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I just happened to be thinking of the budget situation we're looking at in Juneau and Washington, D.C. as well.
nonprofits are probably not going to be receiving as much money from governments as they've received in the past. And so if we were to start requiring that they pay a little bit more of their share for services, do you think, are we going to be putting some of these nonprofits in a situation where they're going to be forced to close down?
Please, please.
I think what you do is, this just allows you to have that conversation with them. We're not at that point. The discussion needs to move on. This isn't the final level by any means. And individual nonprofits are going to have their own individual stories. And there may be some out there that are willing to pay for their services. Maybe they utilize services more than others. That is a discussion that you as the Assembly need to have, and a process that you as the Assembly need to put in place.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dombowski?
I'm sorry, I think she wants to.
Oh,
May I add, Madam
please.
Chair, to answer that question, in one of the discussions, and AEA, for example, the Aid Union, I was talking with him, and they own a building, they own square footage, and they're considered nonprofit in certain one. And when I was talking with him, he says, yes, we should be paying taxes. So those are examples. I mean, it's like you have the conversation with different entities and so on. And that was just one example, but it was a good conversation. He said, yes, we should be. And I think that is probably fair too.
Thank you. Ms. Dombowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think as we have this discussion, I think there's a lot of things that we'll evaluate. Number one, nonprofits. Do they qualify as nonprofits in other capacities, right? Are they maintaining their nonprofit status? Because what we're finding is, nonprofits may have originally qualified, but they don't anymore. So should we keep extending that credit? I would submit probably not. What community benefit is there? Because obviously some nonprofits that provide a service, they do it because they can do it much cheaper than the government could do it, right? So it's a value to every taxpayer to allow them to provide those services and get a tax break so they can provide the services. I don't think anybody's going after them like that. But when we're talking about sprinklers and we're talking about all those different things, this is kind of the easy stuff that we should look at, and common sense will prevail. I think we can all come together on those things. But I think when we are looking at this is an antiquated system. It's a system that we have to brush off the dust and look at it again and just come up with modern guidelines. And we have to have a process in place which consistently reevaluates these nonprofits to ensure that they really do deserve basically the benefit of everyone else's tax dollars. And so I think I was very grateful to see the report. I've said this before and I'll say it again. It was very well done. And I think over the last few years I've watched this commission rise to the challenge, put partisan politics aside, and just go to data. And I appreciate that. And you give us the data, who knows what it'll turn out like in the end. But at least we're able to make educated decisions that aren't colored by partisan politics. And I just want to say I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Dombowski. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions about the resolution itself, and probably about 3 or 4 questions if I could just ask them sequentially. And I apologize, I wasn't at our last meeting, so it could be that a lot of this was gone over, and you just have to catch me up again. What I'm focusing on is in the resolution itself, under the Assembly resolves on the second page, beginning with line 13 and the 4 sections there. I just want to make sure I understand exactly what it is we are seeking. When I look at section 1 and section 2, my understanding of those sections is we're asking the state legislature to allow us, or allow municipalities, I presume, to enter into these pilot agreements with the entities that are designated as mandatory exemptions under state law. Is that correct generally?
That's my understanding. Mr. Wheeler drafted the resolution on our behalf. Mr. Wheeler, is that your understanding?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I didn't realize that Mr. Wheeler was back there. This may
hiding.
make it somewhat easier.
Well, he's hiding with his haircut.
It's
Yes.
the haircut.
He did get a nice new haircut
He
there.
is very,
Looking good, Mr.
very
Wheeler.
dapper back there. Then, if I could just address a couple of questions
Please,
to Mr. Wheeler.
please,
Thank you.
Mr. Evans.
What I couldn't figure out, Dennis, was between section 1 and section 2, it looked like section 1 was asking for, pilot agreements for certain exemptions, and then section 2 was asking for pilot agreements for different exemptions. Is there any reason that it just can't be for all state mandated exemptions?
You have, you have both mandatory and permissive exemptions. So that's one issue. Number two, when you start looking at federal groups, you have to worry about whether or not they enjoy some federal status that we have to address. For example, when we are able to implement these with military housing arrangements, we want to make sure that, notwithstanding sort of being in or involved with a federal enclave, that we can provide exemptions. So we had it written in two different ways here, sort of part of the waterfront.
Okay. Because under section 2, those exemptions, federal, native, religious, education groups are also mandatory exemptions, as I read the statute, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Education.
The pilot agreements we're seeking, and I take it from this, we're asking for authority for municipalities to enter into pilot agreements. It doesn't specifically say, because we're not asking for the state to enter into these agreements, correct?
Right.
And I don't know if that needs to be clarified, but we're asking for the authority to do that ourselves, correct?
Correct.
And would these agreements be literally agreements? Would it require the entity involved to agree to it? Or would there be an aspect by which the municipality could mandate that they have to pay for these services?
I think that's going to be largely up to how the state wants to shape that legislation. My assumption would be that that we are looking at being given permission to require it.
And that makes a lot more sense to me, that we're asking to be able to require it. I think we might want to make that language clearer in here before we give it to the legislature, and who knows what they do with it. Because just in the reading, when it's just talking about agreements, I think you could get the impression that we just want the authority to talk to these people. And because I think some of the examples are places like in Andover where there was actually just an agreement that the Phillips Academy entered into an agreement with the local municipality to do this. And we already have, actually, the Unitarian Church here in town does that already on their own, provides the payment every year voluntarily. I just want to make it sure that what we're asking for is the ability for the state or the city to mandate that these nonprofits on these exemptions actually have to pay, if that's what we want to do, but that it's clear.
Right. Through the chair, in section 1, for example, where it says the state of Alaska should allow these programs, and what we try to do sometimes is balance being able to do it, but not be required to do it. In other words, the state says if a local jurisdiction wants to create this program, it can do so. And if it does, then it can mandate that these entities enter into the agreements. But if some local jurisdiction that has taxing authority doesn't want to even entertain this kind of program, they're not required to do it by the state legislation. So that's part of the trick in section 1.
And I agree with that also. I just think we need to be clear that we are seeking the ability to mandate it if we want to do it, if we want to mandate it. That's what we're looking for.
That's the way that was the way I wrote this without saying it. I
Okay.
guess. Yeah. If this
I think he wants you to say it.
Sounds like.
I guess I want you to say it, yes. Thank you. And the last question I have is simply in section 3, are we asking for the state legislature to require that the exempted organizations qualify as 501c3s where currently they're not? I wasn't clear about what we were seeking there.
Yes. Not necessarily C3s, but certainly under 501 because there's some variations in there. But one of the problems that we've run into, and actually the case that was mentioned earlier is a perfect example of the Sports Storm case. You had a situation where that facility or the land underneath it or some combination thereof was actually held by for-profit corporations. And yet, the purpose, however the court decides the evidence supports that notion, the court concluded, well, there was still a non-profit or charitable purpose. Well, it's a lot easier, rather than go through that factual battle about why is it there and what is it doing, is to put on there this requirement that you meet the federal qualifications. Because then you've got a much broader body of case law, a much broader body of organizations that you can look to and say, okay, they're qualified or they aren't. So that was the idea, yes.
And far be it from me to critique another lawyer's writing on these things.
But.
It seems just logically speaking, if we put Section 3 first, because Section 3 is a much broader category. If what we're doing there is eliminating certain entities entirely from being exempt, those that don't qualify under 501 status, it seems like that would be the first cut that we want the state to say, first of all, these entities shouldn't be granted exemptions unless they qualify. And then, after that, we also request the ability for those that do qualify to enter into these pilot agreements, these mandatory pilot agreements, perhaps. And just for ease of reading, it just makes more sense to me that way, and you can take that for what it's worth.
I'm happy to write it however the body or the sponsor wants me to write it.
Thank you,
That is
Mr.
all.
Evans. Thank you. Any other comments? Are there any folks here representing nonprofits this afternoon? Yes, no? Okay. I have a couple of comments. First off, I really want to thank the Budget Advisory Commission for your report. It was, as Ms. Domboski said, it was really very well done. And you did a lot of research, and I like having that information readily available. And I also appreciate the fact that the commission also drafted your own resolution, and I believe by now you've submitted to the state, or not? Okay. The reality is that everybody in this community, if you apply for it, gets a property tax exemption, whether it's the $20,000 residential or the $150,000 senior citizen, disabled veteran exemption. We all benefit with an exemption in some shape or form. I was happy to have legal draft this resolution, and I'm really glad that it was almost introduced at the last meeting, but I did not introduce it, and I'm glad that I did, because I think it may be a little bit premature at this point. Mr. Evans had some really good questions. It needs work. But the way I like to do business in this community is to bring all the stakeholders to the table and get feedback from them before we bring forward anything at this level, especially when it is affecting a lot of different entities within our community. So my preference is that we not introduce it, that we continue our conversation on this particular subject. What I'd really like to see us focus on immediately is the sprinkler situation. And I have a lot of information on that. As I mentioned, I'm going to be happy to send it. I will send it to everybody. But that's my preference to, and I'm just one person on this committee, to not introduce the resolution at this point, but to have further discussion with the stakeholders at this committee level. I would like to hear some feedback from anybody.
Madam Chair, I just like to say, this is your AR, that you're the sponsor of it. I think ultimately I don't see anybody opposing the spirit of what's in here. I think we all recognize that at the state level there has to be changes made. But being absolutely respectful, if that's your wish, I think it's a good idea. More public involvement is better, whether that happens before introduction or after introduction. To me, I think that's the will of the sponsor, so I would be supportive of your decision.
Thank you, Mr. Moxley. I appreciate that. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I agree that there's no reason to, with these exemptions have lasted for a long time. I think the committee's work, the commission's work on that has been exemplary in bringing this forward as an issue and giving us all the information we need, but we don't need to rush in. It impacts a lot of people. I like the more deliberate approach, getting the stakeholders involved, so I applaud that approach.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I keep wanting to call you Mr. Hall, whether it's in person or in emails. Mr. Trainor, do you have a comment?
No.
Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Wheeler?
Madam Chair, timing-wise, I think the way this would play out, it feeds into this notion of more time. I'll obviously it's unlikely you would get any state legislation this year. So if you got state legislation next year, you're probably not looking at a change in the tax structure. You can implement through agreements until 2017. So you have time.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Okay, audience participation. Would anybody like to make a comment? Now is your time. Okay.
Madam Chair, good afternoon. My name is Mike Welsh. I'm the Vice President of the 4-Acre Group. And we're really happy that you're having this discussion. Alaska's nonprofit sector is an important part of the state's economy, certainly an important part of the local economy, fiscally, socially, and in terms of other significant community impact. And just want to offer up that we would be thrilled to be part of a conversation with all of you about the impact of the nonprofit sector and some of the feelings that we have about pilots. So I just want to offer that.
Would you please offer a business card so I can add you to the distribution list?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments before we adjourn? Now's the time. We have 10 minutes. Okay. We adjourn. Thanks for being here, everybody.